For some people, risking life and limb is part of everyday life.
Keep going! Keep going! Move!
Fear for me is an analytical thing. It's not an emotional thing.
If I got up every morning worrying that my job was dangerous, I don't think I'd do it anymore.
I know how close to get, I know when to back off, and that's what's kept me alive.
Being able to calculate the risk of a hazardous situation can mean the difference between life and death. And for some jobs, this danger just comes with the territory. Few of us face danger in our day-to-day work, but there are some occupations where putting your life on the line goes with the job. For 20 years, I was a professional racing driver. My Formula One career saw me compete at speeds of over 200 miles an hour. I've had approaching 100 crashes and many close calls. There's little room for error. Any mistake can be fatal. There's no doubt the racetrack is a hazardous place to work, but it's a controlled environment where measures are taken to minimize the risks. For those working in a war zone, the rules of the game constantly change.
These people were civilians trying to flee the fighting.
As a result, in 2002, 65 journalists and media staff were killed. Phil By has been filming in war zones for ITN since 1983. In this time, he's been at every major scene of conflict, including the most recent Iraq War.
I don't think that people understand what really happens in war. The last Gulf War was effectively a video game that people sat at home and enjoyed. What actually happens on the ground, and not just in Baghdad or Iraq, but everywhere, is that the horror of war is just unbelievable.
Phil has worked alongside many respected war correspondents, including the late Terry Lloyd, who died from friendly fire in the recent war in Iraq.
It's got to be one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Even the army sort of hold back to positions of safety. We ask our cameramen, I mean, not to be reckless, but to do jobs which are simply dangerous.
In 1991, Phil captured one of the most iconic images of the Gulf War. He was the first to film Tomahawk cruise missiles as they flew over the streets of Baghdad. His footage made headlines around the world.
What sounded like a jet plane, very low overhead, went past. And I just took the camera off the tripod and ran, kept it rolling, and got outside. And no sooner did I get outside than yet another one of these things came past, and they were cruise missiles. We could see them quite clearly twisting as they went. It was quite chilling, actually. There they were in broad daylight, middle of the morning, whizzing along.
So far, 3 have flown over our heads, all heading for their targets, and I think there's some more coming in over here.
They were sensational pictures. The first time the world ever saw what a cruise missile, a smart missile, can do. That this thing shot down the street, past Phil By and Brent Sadler, and almost sort of stopped at the traffic lights before it turned right to head for its target. And it was the first time the world's seen those pictures, and that was thanks to Phil By.
It's not just on the front line that Phil has taken risks. In the build-up to the first Gulf War, he filmed Trevor McDonald's famous interview with Saddam Hussein. After an arduous journey to a highly secret location, he came face-to-face with the Iraqi dictator.
They asked us to line up, and Saddam came in. And that was a very strange experience.
You must be made to pay compensation for the damage that you've caused there.
Mrs. Thatcher says this.
It was like he had very cold eyes. He looked at you, and it was like looking at a shark, you know, that sort of dead look behind the eyes. And you also felt this man would have no compunction at all if we upset him about making sure that we didn't return that night. And so it was very intimidating in a way.
By far the most chilling moment of Phil's career came after the Gulf War, while filming the Balkan conflict in former Yugoslavia. On the 3rd of April 1992, as he and a TV news crew drove towards Belgrade, they were stopped on a quiet country road by 2 Bosnian soldiers. The group, which included the late Terry Lloyd, were forced to drive into a nearby barn.
We looked at each other and I think we all thought the worst. I couldn't think of a way out of it. I remember thinking, this isn't right, no, it's not now, it's not going to happen now. And I got out every bit of paperwork that we had, and you know, the gear lists and passports, and I was saying that somebody somewhere knew where we were. And then one of them fired his weapon.
I felt at that point that this is a firing squad, and I can remember looking around. There were sandbags around, and I was looking around to see if any of the sandbags were bloodstained, to think if this was their normal modus operandi and they'd done it before.
Then there was some discussion between them, and they very quickly robbed us of just superficial things, and they just left. And there was a pause, and we looked at each other, and we just got back into the vehicle, and we drove off towards Belgrade and didn't say a word for about half an hour. And then we looked at each other and just thought, my God, you know, how did we get out of that? We did. And went back to Belgrade and drank a lot.
In this era of 24-hour news channels, the job of a war cameraman is even more perilous than ever. In the recent Iraqi war, 6 cameramen died bringing us those amazing pictures from the front line.
Of course it's dangerous at times, but I think if I dwelt on that and thought I was actually going to put myself in harm's way time and time again, I wouldn't do it.
Celebrities and VIPs are also increasingly in the firing line. Terrorism and society's increasing obsession with public figures has seen personal protection become a necessity rather than a luxury.
As celebrity bodyguard Jerry Judge found out on an assignment to Somalia with supermodel Iman Bowie.
I don't really think that anybody, other than myself, realised how dangerous.
In the past 2 decades, there's been a large increase in the public profile of many VIPs, celebrities and politicians.
With it has come real threats from kidnappers and stalkers, increasing the need for protection from trained bodyguards.
There's a lot of people think because what they see on TV, it's a joke. It's not, or it's easy. It's not. Temperament is very important. As in, I say to people, you use this before this and this before these. And that's very, very important.
Jerry Judge, a former boxer, has been in the personal security industry for over 20 years. He now protects some of the world's most famous celebrities. Jerry not only acts as their personal bodyguard, but provides protection at high-profile celebrity events, like film premieres. A typical occasion was the opening of Pierce Brosnan's new film, Evelyn, in January 2003. At the event, he deployed 10 bodyguards to protect the stars as they arrived.
I have in the past used my hands. I've had to, because of some of the situations we've got into. Is my job dangerous? Yes, it is. I'm very passionate about what I do. For the people that I work for, trust is an amazing thing for what we have to do in our job.
The job of a bodyguard is to protect their celebrity client, whatever the risk to their own life.
A bullet catcher, yeah, I guess that's what they have to do. That certainly it embodies the essence of what somebody who is personal security has to think about when they're taking the job on, is puts themselves in front of the person that they're looking after. And that could be a bullet, that could be a knife, that could be a fist, that could just be somebody waving an autograph book that is an unwanted situation. It's a split-second decision, do I put myself in the firing line? And ultimately that's what you have to do, that's what you're there and being expected to do.
I've had some situations in my life over the last 20 years where it has got dangerous. But you work for clients, and if they get to trust you, that is an amazing step. A, because they trust you that you don't discuss their private life with anybody. And that goes further. They know then you'll look after them to get them in and out of the hotel, out of the airport, to the film premiere, to the actual gig, where if they're a pop star, if they're a singer in a band, or the band itself. A lot of it is what we do today is done on trust. It's very, very difficult when you have someone who you don't know knock on your door at 1 o'clock in the morning that think what they're asking for is an autograph. Now, as a security person, you then have to make a decision. Is it genuine? And I will treat whether you're looking for an autograph or you've got a gun in your hand, I'll treat you with the same respect as in I'll tell you to off.
Protecting the rich and famous as they go about their ordinary lives can be a deceptively risky occupation. When John Lennon was shot dead by an obsessive fan on a street outside his New York apartment, the event became a watershed for celebrity protection worldwide. But safeguarding the life of a VIP in a developing world has always been one of the most hazardous jobs a bodyguard can undertake, as Jerry found out.
In '92, I went to Somalia with Iman, David Bowie's wife, for a 10-day trip. She's making a documentary with the BBC to show, obviously, what was going on in her country and how bad it was and people were dying. And, I knew how bad it was because I'd obviously got in touch with some people that I know, and they told me how dangerous it was.
Travelling in a jeep with the Red Cross and a BBC film crew, Jerry's assignment was to get Iman safely overland to the capital, Mogadishu. Several hours into the journey, they ran into trouble. Ahead of them, armed looters had hijacked a lorry at gunpoint. Sensing danger, Jerry instructed the driver to overtake as quickly as possible.
As they were literally going past, they started opening fire.
Keep going! Keep going! Move!
The trouble is, the driver we were with, he got out of the vehicle and ran off. The gentleman from the Red Cross had Iman. I said to him, get her on the seat, get her behind the seat, and we threw her on the floor between the two seats. And David had bought Iman a bulletproof vest, which I made him throw over him.
Jerry then took the only option open to him, control of the jeep.
Get in the car! Get in the car! Keep her down!
She's okay, it's okay.
It's okay?
Yeah.
So,
they picked the driver up, and I have never wanted to kill a human being as much as I wanted to kill this man, because he endangered not himself, but something in the region of, we had like a crew with us of about 4 or 5, 6 people. He endangered everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
At the first screening of the BBC film, her husband, the rock star David Bowie, thanked Jerry for saving a man's life.
I don't really think that anybody, other than myself, realised how dangerous. Because it's like someone today going into Iraq to do a documentary, and you come up against somebody who's got a gun in their hands, and they decide to start shooting at you. I think it was that point that David thought, this was a very, very serious situation to be in. The first time and the only time I actually made a tape of my last will and testimony was for the Somalian job. And I made it sort of on a tape recorder because I realised how dangerous it was going to be after talking to some friends.
Although Jerry's assignment in Somalia has been the most perilous of his career, the risks are always present.
If I got up every morning worrying that my job was dangerous, I don't think I'd do it anymore. So I intend to do it for... I suppose I intend to do it for as long as the clients want me.
all right, still doing the old shenanigans.
I get a lot of pleasure when a client steps off a plane, and I'm with that client for the 2 days, 5 days, 6 weeks, wherever, and then I put that person back on the plane. And when I shake hands with that person and they take off, I've done my job. I love what I do.
In the aftermath of a major disaster, the effective deployment of emergency response units can mean the difference between life and death.
Specialist rescue teams trained to save people after natural disasters and terrorist attacks often place themselves in potentially dangerous situations. Rescue worker Doug Kopp has experienced more than most. In 1985, he formed the American International Rescue Team, a specialist organisation that deals with major disasters. Since it was formed, Doug estimates they have saved 125,000 people.
I've worked at pretty much every major disaster type you can think of, except a nuclear explosion. I've been to war, I've been to revolution, I've been to bombings, landslides, mudslides, rock slides, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, building collapses, plane crashes, ship sinkings, toxic clouds, firestorms, you pretty much name it,
Doug's expertise has taken him to disaster zones all over the world.
You know, fear has different faces, and fear for me is an analytical thing. It's not an emotional thing. The minute it becomes an emotional thing, then you better get out of there, because you're going to kill yourself and kill someone else too. I actually feel at home inside of collapsed buildings because it's kind of like my world. I can live in there. Other people come in, they get killed, you know.
One of the team's greatest rescues took place in August 1999 when an earthquake struck in northwestern Turkey, killing 20,000 people. Although many survived the initial devastation, they were trapped under the collapsed buildings. One of these was a young girl, found under the wreckage of a house after 4 days by Doug's team. Doug moved the rubble to her side, one piece at a time, careful not to dislodge the debris above her.
How old? Huh? 11. Yeah, okay. Okay, does the doctor want to look now? Can you pull your room?
I had made the commitment that I was going to die with her if I didn't rescue her. The slab that you see sticking down over her face was actually the second floor above her. She had 9 floors above her of concrete. The first floor above her was 1/16 of an inch over her chest. And between that and the slabs above, there was a space of 1.5 feet. And all of that was being supported by the corner edge of a piece of plywood on its edge. It was like a blade of grass holding up a 5-ton truck.
When the earthquake hit, she was lying by her bed. This saved her life by creating a protective space around her as the house caved in. She couldn't move, but was able to communicate.
Okay. You're okay now.
After 3 painstaking hours, his team had created just enough space to ease a stretcher underneath her. Very carefully, they pulled the girl out of the gap.
Okay.
Her arm was broken and she had neck and back injuries, but none were life-threatening.
So it was extremely complicated. It was extremely dangerous. And she was a very sweet, wonderful, intelligent, courageous girl, and it was just absolutely wonderful to save her life.
All right. Hey! You can't imagine the amount of horror and dead bodies I've gone through in order to find that nice little girl.
In everyone's career, there comes a defining moment. For Doug, this came on September 11th, 2001, when terrorists flew 2 planes into New York's World Trade Center. 3,000 people died in the disaster that shook the world. Thousands of people managed to escape after the initial collision. Within an hour, the first tower began to collapse. It was soon followed by the second. The number of people trapped in the rubble was unknown, so Doug and the American rescue team were called in to search for survivors. The scale of the disaster dwarfed anything they had experienced before.
Immediately started looking for subterranean voids, which I knew would exist around the perimeters in the subterranean areas. I knew that there would be literally thousands of people alive in those voids.
After 2 days of relentless searching through millions of tons of rubble without success, the rescue services gained access to below, what became known as Ground Zero.
Here's building 893, World Trade Center in New York, going down to the parking garage. We're in quite deep. Keep pounding. If you're trying to signal us, hit 3 large hits.
can see what's above me up here. Shining
The operation had inherent hazards for Doug, who faced the threat of collapsing debris and sewage raining down on him.
Nasty. Below ground zero was another world. I would call it the darkest place on earth. I would call it the gateway to hell. It really made you feel that it was of another world, but of another world that was very sinister.
Okay, this is in the Commuter's Cafe. So as you go around, well, there's TV, there's cash register, there's the bar, and thank the Lord, no dead bodies, so everybody in here, in here got out.
It was an inch of black soot over everything, and in everything. I mean, I looked at my face and it's like, you know, I had this black soot, this black stuff. It's so permeated everything of me that it coated each individual hair, and all you could see was like the pink of my tongue and the white of my eyes. What I didn't know is that it was so toxic and so poison and just filled my lungs.
The magnitude of the disaster had not only left no survivors after the first day, but it produced toxins that became a serious threat to the rescue workers' lives. Doug's health dramatically deteriorated in the aftermath of September 11th. To stay alive, he was prescribed 200 medicines a day.
Essentially, my main problem is that all my internal organs in my eyes are severely damaged from the fact that I have hundreds, if not thousands, of toxic metals and chemicals in my body. I burnt the lining of my lungs from 3 levels below ground zero. Also, I restricted airway syndrome, whereas for about a year it was like breathing through a straw. And also from the collapsed subways, I absorbed, I got 10 types of fungus in my lungs. For more than a year, I'd be out of breath just by eating my dinner. I couldn't walk more than 5 feet, you know, without getting out of breath, and I'd be hyperventilating if I tried to go between 10 and 15, 20 feet.
Today, Doug's fight continues. It may take 5 years for the toxins to leave his body, but although he can no longer work at the level he could before, he has no regrets.
I always expected to die getting crushed to death inside of a collapsed building, because you can't do something that's impossible over and over and over and over and over again, you know, without it finally biting your tail off, right? But, you know, I thought it'd be in a third world country. I have no regrets whatsoever for anything I did. In fact, I would do it all over again without a second's hesitation. What I did was the right thing. And if God wants me to die doing the right thing, then I'll die. But that's the way I'm going to live. Period.
And you can see the size of it. It has been called over the past 24 hours a monster of a storm.
While most people wouldn't welcome the prospect of being caught in the path of a violent weather system, there's one group of meteorologists and photographers who live for the perfect storm. They call themselves the storm chasers.
Being afraid is part of chasing. There are times when the hell's hitting the chase truck, or a lightning bolt hits nearby, or you know, you see a tornado forming very close to you. My fear is very real, just like anyone else. I'm not immune to it.
Violent weather conditions around the globe have created a new breed of extreme enthusiasts, the storm chasers. Like motor racing, the attraction is thrilling, but it's a dangerous one.
In the last 50 years, tornadoes have killed more than 4,000 people in North America. Video footage captured by storm chasers is an important resource for scientists trying to understand the world's more unusual weather systems.
When I first started chasing, I really didn't see any future in it. I thought, great, this will be a hobby. I'll go out, spend a couple weeks in the spring out chasing tornadoes and shoot the lightning here in the desert. But the more I became involved in on the business end, I would shoot a photo and someone would say, wow, you know, that's something I would use in a magazine or a book. I realized, I put the two and two together and realized there was something to be made here as far as a career goes.
Warren chases these storms in a specially designed vehicle, more of a rally than a racing car. It has to be strong enough to stand anything a tornado can throw at it.
Well, this is the Archangel Chase Unit. It's custom designed
SUV, which is a sports utility vehicle, and it's designed for one thing, and that is getting me to a storm, allowing me to do it safely and to, at the same time, be able to shoot the footage that I need. Probably the most noticeable modification here is this roll cage. It's a racing type roll cage. It serves two functions. One is, obviously, if you were to roll the vehicle, it would protect you. But also, I think even more importantly, if you're under something, a wind or a tornado was to drop something, to fall, it would protect the passengers from an impact here on top.
It covers an area of 250,000 square miles.
You want to go right to the center of the low.
Which includes a region in America's Midwest known as Tornado Alley. On average, 770 twisters hit the States each year.
Yeah, it's a very large tornado. When I'm chasing, my goal or my purpose is to get as close as possible and to do it as safe as I can, as close as possible to just about any kind of storm phenomena, whether it's lightning or hail or tornadoes or hurricanes. I want to get as close as possible and get the most graphic images I can. Might have zero visibility up here too. I think we're right here. Well, hopefully this building over here won't come apart on this. Jesus Christ, slow down, man. You got to stop. We're going to have any visibility. Go on beyond this debris here in case this building comes apart. No visibility. No visibility. Zero. You want to go back the other way? Go on up a little bit more as far as we can go. Yeah, we can get away from the building there. The greatest danger in storm chasing is not what most people think. Most people think the high risk of storm chasing are the tornadoes or lightning. Really, the driving, the transportation end of chasing is by far the most dangerous part of chasing, because you're driving across thousands of miles, driving through back roads in some really bad conditions with wet roads, poor visibility. You have a lot of other people on the road. You have farm equipment on the road. You have other chasers on the road. So, believe it or not, the biggest danger chasing is just getting to the storm. That can be sometimes the most challenging part.
Warren's big career break came after 6 months of storm chasing. Risking his life, he photographed a bolt of lightning as it struck a light pole. The picture appeared in magazines around the world.
Lightning is very terrifying. It doesn't matter if you're a storm chaser and you've seen it 1,000 times, or if you've never seen a lightning bolt in your life. Lightning is always frightening. There's no way to become immune from that. And when I shot the famous photograph of the lightning hitting the light pole, that scared me to death. I mean, the impact of the bolt, it's an instantaneous just explosion of sound and light all at once. You can smell, there's a certain kind of an odd ozone type smell in the air. This all happens within a fraction of a second. And the charge actually carried into the underpass. I could have easily been killed. I mean, it was raining at the time, and that charge could have easily carried either through the ground or through the air and killed me. And at the time, I didn't know that. And nowadays, when I look back and realize how fortunate I was to not only get the shot, but also survive.
Tornadoes can be even more dangerous. The most severe is an F5, which can produce wind speeds of up to 300 miles an hour, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake.
No cussing, please. To see an F5 tornado, I think that's what most chasers dream of. It's the big game. It's the big prize is at least once in your life to see an F5. And I was very fortunate the first tornado that I witnessed. This tornado was so big that it looked like a smoke cloud on the ground. It was well over a mile wide. So it didn't look, you don't associate something like that with the usual funnel, like the Wizard of Oz, the very classic funnel. This was just a giant monster hugging the ground, literally destroying everything in its path. Keep going, punches, babe. Let's get close to it and get some good shots.
A storm chaser knows he's got to take chances to get the best pictures.
I'd say about now.
I'd say about
good. Green grass, white
keep
photo.
Going, keep going.
We're gonna miss it.
Keep going. You're not gonna miss it. Keep going. I would not call myself a thrill seeker. I would not call myself someone who has an adrenaline junkie. I do think I am someone who is pretty good at calculating risk management. There is a certain amount of calculation that goes on as far as how much risk is worth the shot. Being afraid is part of chasing. There are times when the hell's hitting the chase truck, or a lightning bolt hits nearby, or you see a tornado forming very close to you. My fear is very real, just like anyone else. I'm not immune to it.
We are southbound on Highway 27,
in Kansas have a report of a tornado directly to the west of us, Dodge City radar, reporting it. Tom, watch out for this guy. It's going around directly.
In 1996, Warren was in pursuit of a tornado when he drove into a severe hailstorm. This is often associated with twisters and has been known to kill.
Any type of hail hitting a vehicle is spooky, but when it gets to be baseball size, not only is it spooky, but it's also dangerous and quite destructive. And unless you've personally heard baseball size hail hitting a vehicle and the glass breaking and just the loud sound is almost deafening. We just lost the front windshield. Tom, can you see? It's just something you never forget, and something once it's happened to you, most chasers are somewhat hail shy, where they'll really be careful the next time they go near any storm and try to do anything they can to avoid it. Well, we made it through the hailstorm with 3 dents and a broken windshield. It was a close escape, and the reason I say that is because we found out later. We heard this on the scanner. We heard a law enforcement officer yelling and screaming over the scanner that he was hitting large hail. And it wasn't until several days later that I heard that this officer in the same storm had hail that was hitting his truck or his patrol unit so bad he had to crawl into the back seat and cover himself. The glass was broken out and the roof was actually almost caved all the way in from this hail. So when I heard that story, I was like, man, we got out of there just in time.
Despite the aid of advanced weather satellites, storm chasing remains a risky business.
That is wild. Lightning, did you see that? Lightning in the funnel.
I think the only reason I've survived this long, a lot of it is luck. There's no doubt that I'm the luckiest son of a gun in the world when it comes to chasing, that I would never dream of doing now. I realized I was very, very lucky in a lot of situations to get through them. I know better now because I have the experience and the knowledge, and I know a little bit more about meteorology. But when I first started chasing, I look back and realize I'm very, very fortunate to be around.
There is one predator feared more than any other on our planet, the shark. In 2002 alone, there was more than 60 attacks worldwide.
These attacks do little to bolster the shark's much maligned image. They're increasingly under threat from overfishing.
Our main study site is a place in the Coral Sea called Osprey Reef, and we go out to Osprey regularly, and we have a large population of sharks that we've been studying there for the last 6 years.
Richard Fitzpatrick has dedicated his life to researching and protecting these animals, and this means sometimes taking risks.
158-5A-047A.
One of the more hazardous aspects of Richard's work with sharks involves tagging them with microchips. By doing this, he can monitor their movements and have a better understanding of how these sharks live in the ocean.
Sharks are an apex predator. They're at the top of the food chain. They are the kings of the sea. You know, they control everything, all the food chains down below them, and they play this role, and it's a very important role. Sharks are essential. We need them, and they have to be used in a sustainable way. You know, they are in that position and that role for a reason. That's why they've been there for 400 million years, because they do the job as the apex predator so well.
Working with sharks is not always as risky as it looks. It's only when a stimulus like food is introduced that the aggressive side of the fish comes out. But there's one type that should be feared at all times.
Well, there's only one species of shark that I consider as a shark that would immediately look at you and go, you're a potential food source, and that's a great white shark. There are other large sharks like tiger sharks, for example, that have been known to attack humans as well. But the great white shark will immediately size you up if it's hungry, and it will say, you're not a seal, you're not a dolphin, but I know that you're edible.
Great whites are primarily found in the coastal waters of Australia, South Africa, and America. Researchers take the potential threat posed by these sharks seriously, often working in a protective cage or capturing research footage from the safety of their own boat.
We're working on great white sharks, and my job was to film the white sharks as they came close to the boat. And to do that, I was hanging over the side of the boat with my camera on an extension pole, and it was actually all tied around my neck. And I remember using the little video monitor on my chest to see what was happening underwater. The great white was a 5 metre one, swam by, and I let it swim out of frame. And while I was waiting for it to clear frame and get a bit of blue water shots at the end, the great white actually turned down, up and underneath, came at high speed and grabbed the video camera. I was watching this whole thing on the monitor, and so you're seeing blue water and then you see a lump come out from the bottom and thinking, what's that? And then the whole camera was engulfed. So I was watching the camera being swallowed by the great white. Because it was all tied around my neck, when the shark turned to swim off, it dragged me into the water with it. And so there I was in the water getting bashed around and slapped by the shark, you know, having glimpsed that image of going down the shark's mouth. But luckily, one of my co-workers, Ian Gordon, grabbed me by the foot and just hung on. The shark spat the camera out, and back on board I came. So in one sense, it was like a virtual shark attack. And I must say, it really did shake me up quite a bit.
The ways in which a great white can kill its victims range from a single lethal bite to drowning its victim after knocking them unconscious. But even smaller sharks can attack in numbers if agitated or scared.
If we're diving with the sharks are very aware we're there. It may be the first time they've come across a big, ugly diver with lots of bubbles coming out, and you know, we're quite scary objects underwater and something that sharks have probably not seen before. So as a result, they do tend to get a bit nervous, and when they get nervous, they can lash out and attack sometimes as well. The biggest killer in all cases with sharks and in life, basically, is that fear and panic kills people. You have to maintain control. You can't allow your emotions to overtake your body. And if you do that, you're relatively safe.
Richard accidentally put this theory to the test.
We went down and we'd just set up the crate to start attracting sharks in, and I was doing a bit of film work, and I went high, way above the crate, probably about 10 metres above, and just filming around, and for some reason, we still don't know why, all the sharks just fired up, and I probably had about 15 grey reef sharks on me like that. They just came in, and yeah, it was pretty spooky because everywhere I looked, sharks were coming in. I was getting hit, I was getting slapped by them. I could feel one sort of trying to get on my calf, but I was spinning in the water, and luckily I had my camera, and I was spinning the camera around, smacking sharks in the head. After about 15, 20 seconds, it was all over. But to have the sharks fire off like that is quite a frightening event. Talking to a lot of people think, you know, you're just crazy with what you do, but that's the initial perceptions. For those people who've actually come along on trips and seen us in action, they know that, you know, I'm not out there trying to kill myself. You always have that chance of danger, but I wouldn't, you know, say I'm crazy and nuts. Just someone who's really passionate about sharks and the marine environment. After the great white incident, when the shark came up, I actually came back and proposed to my girlfriend and got married. I should have realised that sharks are not as dangerous as being married. But the best job in the world, you know, playing with sharks. It's something I've always been excited by, and to be able to make your living out of doing both shark research and filming, it's really cool.
Despite the use of digital technology, stuntmen still have an integral role to play in television and film. Many stunts still require them to take real risks.
You are creating an illusion of disaster, excitement, adrenaline, and of high levels of danger.
Few movies are made without the help of a stuntman. They push the boundaries of what can be achieved without serious injury to themselves or others.
I would say my specialist areas, if I have some, are high falls, fire and explosion jobs, and driving. You are creating an illusion of disaster, excitement, adrenaline, and of high levels of danger. So intrinsically, there is going to be some danger elements there.
Working in such a high-risk industry, safety precautions have to be exhaustive. David works alongside a highly skilled stunt team to safely produce the desired action and effect.
Where's Mark? Oh, he's here. You checked the petrol?
Yes.
Is it all right?
Yes.
Nice one.
Dave and his team put their stunts to the test in direct competition at competitive events. Going head-to-head in this environment allows them to push their stunts to the limit before they reach the big screen.
I would say that the ones with the highest potential danger have got to be the world record attempts. They are world records for reasons that they are technically very difficult.
In 2002, Dave was in Moscow for the International Stuntman Festival, representing the UK against teams from across Europe. He was there to break a world record with a death-defying car jump. The previous record was 234 feet. Dave's target was 250.
When I actually look at the footage, I get more concerned or more adrenaline than when I actually did the jump. Firstly, we had to achieve around about 90 mile an hour to the bottom of the ramp, and we really wanted to get off the ramp at about 85. We didn't have a road as a run-up, we had a footpath, which was pretty straight but not absolutely straight. At the base of the ramp, we had 9-inch clearance either side. So if you imagine travelling 80 mile an hour down a bumpy path with limited visibility, with only 9 inches of clearance, it's an awful lot to think about.
Once the car had hit the water, he had just a few seconds to escape before it sank.
I did not find it very pleasant at all, being trapped in a car, upside down, in silt, having hit the water at about 90 miles an hour.
But Dave hit his target and broke the record. Fire stunts are one of the most dangerous on a film set. Meticulous planning is required to ensure the effect is safe. There's no room for error. Dave Judge attempts to take this discipline to a new level. In 2001, he attempted to break the world body burn record, a stunt often showcased in films.
It takes up to an hour to put the suit on, and so you are very uncomfortable, you're claustrophobic, your internal core temperature starting to build, you're sweating, you're struggling to breathe, and then somebody comes and sets fire to you. It's not a nice environment.
The time to beat was 2 minutes and 7 seconds.
Primarily, your main problem is breathing. I actually breathe through a tube which went down my leg, but that can only be used prior to and immediately after the burn itself. While everything's exploding and on fire around you, you really don't want to be breathing in air from the exterior. From there on, once things actually do catch and start burning, you are basically relying on the air that's in your lungs and a small amount that's contained on the inside of the helmet, which is probably 5 lungfuls. So this is why this 2-minute barrier is such a big deal. It's not by virtue of the temperature or anything like that, it's simply running out of air.
For this, he wore a prototype reusable suit. Colleagues kept him informed on the time through an earpiece. Although the record-breaking stunt started off well, he became short of air and felt very uncomfortable. Falling to the ground, he signalled to his colleagues to put the fire out.
As soon as you hit the deck and the safety team comes in with the fire extinguishers, it is by no means over. You don't really feel like you're out of this very unpleasant environment until the headgear's off. We can't take the headgear off until all of the consumables are taken off you. That is the actual wardrobe that's actually burning, because it's still potentially ridden with fuel. There are still potentially some hot spots, and on occasions we do get reignition.
Dave remained on fire for 2 minutes and 12 seconds, setting a new record. Successful record-breaking attempts like this are fed back into the film industry, producing safer and more spectacular stunts.
It's about control and technique, and sometimes it's not unusual to find yourself in a potentially very stressful environment. If I was to find myself in a job where I was extremely frightened, I would say I probably shouldn't be here, I'm being scared for a reason. Yes, sometimes you've just got to step back and spend some time adapting yourself to it, mentally preparing yourself for it. The job is both physically stressful, but definitely at times mentally stressful, and you do have to deal with that in certain ways.
Those who work in high-risk situations share certain qualities. The ability to make split-second decisions under tremendous pressure.
There is that element of kind of a adventurous, to heck with everything attitude that allows you to go out there and have fun when most people would be frightened to death.
I still don't like loud explosions. They make me jump. The only advantage I have is I'm sort of quite slow-witted and I jumped rather slower than most people, so the camera stays steady. Maybe that's why they've chosen me to do this.
You don't get to make a mistake. Halfway through a mistake, you're already dead. You never get past the beginning of a mistake. And death comes really fast.
Above all, they have to be fearless, when the rest would probably freeze.
You think you're enjoying a relaxing holiday in a beautiful setting, perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime trip, but then something goes disastrously wrong.
Jesus Christ, we're not smoking.
People were throwing toilet rolls at us and saying, "Here, you'll need this. This is the island of hell."
As I got behind the tree, I mean, I've never felt anything like it. This is a big tree and it just shook the amount of times it just got hit. So at this point here, I just thought they're definitely shooting at us.
To sit here and say I thought I was going to die, those words do sound more over the top, but you do think it. You do stand there and you do think, this is it.
As tourism becomes more adventurous, people often forget that exotic surroundings can have hidden dangers, sometimes turning the dream holiday into a living nightmare. These days, it has become increasingly popular to get married in exotic locations. In September 1999, Kevin and Samantha Gator from Stoke-on-Trent decided, like many couples, to tie the knot overseas. They chose a sun-drenched Caribbean island with their close friends, Robert and Suzanne Owen.
We went to the Bahamas on recommendation of my best friend, Rob, as they went there for their honeymoon when they just got married.
They wanted to go abroad to do it, and we said there's no better place than the Bahamas. So they looked at our video and photographs and they decided that that's where they were going to get married.
It was basically their fault that we ended up there.
On arrival, the weather and location were as perfect as they had imagined.
My idea of a dream wedding was to get married on the beach, in a gazebo. It was a fairy tale wedding, and that's what I wanted, and that's what I was hoping to have.
We basically had 2 days before we had to go into the capital, Nassau, to register to apply to get married in the Bahamas. So for the first 2 days it was pure luxury. The climate was wonderful and everything we'd imagined up until we went to Nassau to register, and that was when things started to take a turn for the worse.
And this is the shopping trip. All the shops are shut.
When we got into town, everybody was boarding the windows up and most of the shops were closing, and we couldn't understand why this was happening.
Just by the looks on the locals' faces, you knew that it was something quite different that was on its way.
Everybody was running around in a panic, and shopkeepers were boarding up the windows with big planks of wood, and we thought, there's something bad going on here.
They were alarmed to discover that a hurricane named Floyd was heading for the island. It was a Category 4 storm, producing winds up to 145 miles per hour. Such forces could result in mass destruction, injuries, and death.
Our next priority was to get back to the hotel and find out what we'd got to do. And once we got there, reception was absolutely chaos.
It was pandemonium. Everybody's trying to check out of the hotel. Every phone was in use trying to book a flight to leave the island.
The only thought that most people had in their mind was obviously to leave, and that option was only really came to American citizens, as there were a lot of flights going out to America.
British citizen, you've got no chance. You're here for the duration. Followed all instructions to put all belongings in the bath, which for some reason they said was the safest place for all belongings. Taking all the cabinets apart, i.e. the drawers on the floor, the television face down. Once we'd done all the instructions that the hotel had told us to do, there was nothing we could do.
Macho man.
I think we just went out and went on the beach or sunbathed.
It was literally the lull before the storm. The situation was out of their hands. The resort was almost deserted, except for them.
My main concern was I've got to phone home and let everybody know that we're okay. But Kev was like, no, we mustn't phone home because they might not even know about it, and then you're going to worry them unnecessarily.
And you can see the size of it. It has been called over the past 24 hours a monster of a storm, over 600 miles in diameter. You want to compare that to a state, you can just compare it to Florida.
They're reckoning on this being one of the largest hurricanes in 100 years to hit the island, so judging by past ones, they were small in comparison to what was about to become.
And all these rooms here have all been evacuated at the front.
It was roughly about 6 or 7 p.m. that evening. Me and Rob went down to the beachfront, and you could just feel the gust of wind coming.
As you can see, there's no one around. Nobody doing anything. Still 12 hours away from the hurricane, and the place is deserted.
Didn't say a lot to one another. We just looked around and tried to take in, this is paradise. What are we going to re-emerge to if the evacuation comes and the next time we see daylight?
Okay, see you inside, eh?
Nothing could prepare them for what they were about to encounter, as the eye of the storm was headed straight for their island.
This is bad. This is really, really bad. You know, we might not make it.
Kevin and Samantha Gator had taken a trip of a lifetime to get married in the idyllic Bahamas with their best friends Robert and Suzanne. But 2 days after they arrived, a powerful Category 4 hurricane called Floyd began to threaten their island, leaving the tourists trapped in their hotels.
The place was eerily quiet. People just didn't know what to expect.
It was going to Miami, but now it's changed course and it's coming to Nassau, the Bahamas. The eye of the storm is coming straight for us, so we're going to have it fun.
The hotel only had a very basic plan in place to protect holidaymakers from the dangers of the storm, due to hit the island in only a few hours.
The reality for me didn't sink in until the entertainment stopped at 11 o'clock dead and the evacuation notice came. We'd got to go to the ballroom. They told us to go back to a room, grab some essentials, and it was then that I thought, oh no, and I was physically sick. It made me feel so bad. It was then that the reality sunk in.
The waves have just been coming over. They are coming.
Things obviously got worse outside. You could hear the wind actually rattling the shutters that were up to the window.
The room was lit up for a few hours, but then the electric went. It was dark.
And at one point there was a lantern hanging outside and you could hear it swinging from side to side, and that's when it really got kind of quite spooky, quite frightening.
It was creaking constantly with the wind. It was like something you'd expect to hear in a horror film.
You couldn't actually see what was going on, you could just hear it, and sometimes sound is a lot more frightening than actually seeing what's going on. So that for me was the point where it was the point of no return, where it was frightening, where I felt scared, and where I felt, what is going on? Would we, and when would we sort of get out, and what would it be like once we were out?
Even as the hurricane unleashed its destructive power, Kevin and Robert continued to film the unfolding action.
If you did venture downstairs, you could just see palm trees at a 45-degree angle through the ferocity of the winds.
I went out again with my trusty camcorder to try and get some of this history, and I really struggled to stay on the feet.
I'm being sheltered by the building here.
And it just proves that we weren't standing in the open, we were more or less against the building, and the power of it was absolutely tremendous.
The hurricane raged all night, with winds reaching over 100 miles per hour. Next day, the eye of the storm passed overhead, but Floyd wasn't finished yet. The worst was still to come, as the tail end of any hurricane can unleash a more destructive power.
As it started battering the opposite side of the ballroom, it was only at this point that the shutters themselves were being ripped off. I don't know how many windows surrounded the actual ballroom, but at least half a dozen of them, they were ripped off. The pane glass was just blown straight out. Once the steel shutters went, that was it. So there was a lot of glass on the floor. There was an emergency exit door at the back of the ballroom where the back of it must have been blown through, and it just blew the emergency exit doors off its hinges.
This is bad. This is really bad. You know, we might not make it. It was very weird. Yeah.
All in all, it wasn't far off 3 days it took for the hurricane to pass.
On the morning of the third day, residents awoke to a scene of utter devastation. Hurricane Floyd had caused over £1 billion worth of damage and the biggest evacuation in the history of the US coastline.
This paradise that we'd gone to was just non-existent.
I just couldn't believe what I saw. There was glass everywhere, shutters on the floor. The pool was just full of rubble that had been blown in from the sea.
That's where Kevin said I'm supposed to be getting married.
You just feel numb. You think, crikey, how have we come out of it alive?
The day after. Go life. Terrible. What do you reckon, Sam?
Oh yeah.
No beach, no swimming pool, no trees. But plenty of beer.
I really thought then that we'd be going home. I didn't ever imagine that we would be getting married. And I just thought, all that planning, and for what?
Despite being involved in one of the worst hurricanes of the region, Kevin and Samantha were still able to fulfill their dream.
The gazebo was standing on the beach, God knows how, but covered in seaweed, the lot, you name it, but it was still standing. And I think once the hotel offered us the opportunity to still get married, you didn't have to ask either of us twice.
I just wanted to get out there and get married to Kev. It made you realise how precious life is.
Over 800,000 Britons booked a cruise holiday in 2002 alone. Cruises are normally a safe and luxurious way to view the world's most exotic and far-flung locations. For David Thompson, a former lifeboat man, a cruise up the Malaysian coastline with his partner Penny was to be a leisurely way to see Southeast Asia.
3 weeks before the holiday, I was in hospital, and had to beg the consultant and doctor to let me go on holiday. The consultant asked me if it was going to be relaxing. Nothing exerting, he said. Little did he know.
The idea was to have a week's cruise up the Malacca Strait, visiting Malacca, Penang, Phuket.
Then to Bali to do some sunbathing and relaxing. The whole package holiday was going to be something to remember.
Their journey was aboard the Sun Vista, a Singaporean registered cruise ship that was built in 1963. It held 456 passengers and 632 crew. The ship's entertainment was provided by singer Kate Jarvis, who had her own reservations before setting off.
I remember getting on this boat thinking, am I going to do this again? Can I do this again? And I had a few doubts in my head, and I just had a feeling about whether I was doing the right thing or whether this was going to be a good contract, and just a few questions going over.
As soon as we went down the gangway and on board, we could initially, the fuel smell was horrendous. Diesel oil, which you should not have. That part of the ship where you're at, where the purser's office is.
David's fears were not unfounded. 6 days into the cruise, as the ship sailed 50 miles off the coast of Malaysia, the ship suffered a power failure and a fire started in the engine room.
We were sitting on deck, and I noticed some sort of smoke coming from the side of the funnel.
Then she noticed smoke coming out the vents on the funnel. So I had to walk along to the vents, and I could see there was smoke coming in. It was electrical, you could smell rubber burning. So I went back to her and I said, there's a fire in there.
And then the smoke coming out the funnel went it just went jet black, and everybody started to notice it at that point.
A meeting was then called briefly in our dressing rooms, and we were just told there was a small fire in the engine room and that it was under control. And to go out to the passengers and just make light of the situation and just chat to people and just reassure them that everything was fine and it would all be okay. There were security guards at the top of the stairwells either side, and they had radios, which obviously we could overhear information going back and forth to the officers. And all of a sudden, we heard over the radio the captain saying, this is an abandoned ship situation, abandoned ship. I mean, I heard those words and they just rang in my head. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. We're abandoning ship. We've got to get off this thing.
At the same time, I would like you to prepare to abandon this ship.
At 6:30 p.m., nearly 4 hours after the drama began, they were told to abandon ship. They were 44 miles from the coast in shark-infested waters.
We were directed to go to another deck, and we had to go back inside the ship again. The crew had torches. It was absolutely pitch black. And I started to feel frightened then, because up until then I was totally complacent about it. Cruise ships, nothing happens to cruise ships.
Main thing that sticks in my head is hearing children crying. And, you know, because there was just people going everywhere in all different directions, grabbing at life jackets, grabbing bottles of water, you know, it kind of all it gets muffled in your head, and but the main thing is the children crying for me.
By then, all the crews at the lifeboats with life jackets. We didn't have a life jacket between us. I got a survival suit, a plastic suit, which you put on over a life jacket. That's as much as I was given. Women and children on the boats first. 1 or 2 irate males tried to get on, but they were stopped. The crew were very, very poorly trained.
This lack of training applied to the lowering of the lifeboats as well, which quickly turned into chaos.
By that time, really frightened.
When you started seeing these lifeboats get stuck, that scared me, because the whole thing comes through your head of, is there going to be enough lifeboats? You know, is everybody going to get off safely?
It was horrendous. I thought, if we're going to go down, that's when it was going to happen. It's a long way to go from a lifeboat, from the ship's lifeboat deck down to the sea.
There was a handful of us that were beginning to think, you know, what are we going to do? We're not going to get off this ship. And we thought, if we're going to have to jump, we're going to have to. So we threw the rope ladder over and it fell into the sea. It wasn't even connected to the ship.
We're still drifting beside the ship when 3 of their crew members jumped over the side. They jumped off the ship into the water. I don't think they realised it was shark infested, otherwise they wouldn't have done that.
It sounds dramatic to sort of, I mean, it is dramatic, but to sit here and say I thought I was going to die, those words do sound more over the top, but you do think it. You do stand there and you do think, this is it. I can't. It's the most scary point probably in my life that hopefully I won't ever feel again.
As night fell, the Sun Vista finally sank at 1:20 in the morning. The passengers floated at sea for nearly 6 hours before being rescued.
It was a really, really eerie situation once we were in the life rafts. There was a dead silence and pitch black, and people were calm, and you couldn't hear any children crying. You could just hear the real slight murmur of just people talking. I know that I kept sitting there picturing, it was weird things, picturing like photographs of my family on my cabin wall burning and things like that, and it's bizarre what pictures you get in your head of what's going on in a little space where I had set up home.
An inquiry into the incident revealed a catalogue of errors affecting all parts of the ship. Although everyone survived the sinking, a disaster like this cannot easily be forgotten.
I don't think there's a day or that something doesn't go through my mind that reminds me of it, or I remember something that I'd lost.
The ship is still in the Malacca Strait. It still has all our money and all our papers and all our clothes still on board. Bit rotten now, but 4 years later on, it's to be expected.
When booking a package holiday, travellers expect to be put in the safe hands of the tour operator. But for Marjorie White, a 2-week vacation on the island of San Andres turned into a nightmare.
I expected a Caribbean island. That's what I expected. And what I got was hell.
Package holidays are still a popular way to enjoy a trip abroad. More than 20,000 Britons put their trust in the hands of the tour operator. For a group of British holidaymakers who travelled to a new holiday island called San Andres, their faith in the operator was tested to the limit.
The description in the brochure was white sands, palm trees, blue seas, a tropical paradise, a place that you would remember for the rest of your life. And that was what we expected to find when we got there.
We were expecting a Caribbean island that was just full of sun, full of very nice people, and just to relax. We both had very, very busy jobs, and we just wanted to relax and see a different country.
But from the moment they touched down on the Caribbean island, they sensed a very different San Andres to the one depicted in the brochure.
What's the hotel like, yeah?
My first impressions were of hundreds of holidaymakers at the airport, the airport was still being built, and the holidaymakers that were waiting to go home on the plane we'd just arrived on were shouting to us from the balcony and throwing toilet rolls down to us on the runway and shouting, "Grab these, you'll need them, and welcome to the island of hell."
When they eventually arrived at the hotel, the holiday began to truly stink.
When I got out of the taxi and opened the door and stood outside, the very first thing that hit me was the most disgusting smell that I've ever smelt in my life. And all I can say is that the smell was very much like an overpowering smell of raw sewage.
Jesus Christ, when I smell it.
I walked round the back of the hotel, and at the rear of the hotel I was quite shocked to find that there was a mangrove area where the hotel was discharging raw sewage into this mangrove area. But what they were also doing was that we couldn't use toilet paper and flush it away down the toilet. Consequently, we had to put it into a wicker basket was what was in our room. Some people just had a rusty old can, nothing with a lid on it.
One day I was just sort of having a cup of tea and a lady came past and she looked quite frightened and I said, "Are you all right?" No, she said, "I've just been lying down," she said, "and I heard this noise under the bed." She said, and when I looked under the bed, there's a big rat eating me Pringles.
There was crisps inside it and had teeth marks all the way down the crisps.
Look, this is the box. And it was all bitten away where the rat had eaten these Pringles, and that was in the middle of the afternoon.
If the trouble inside the hotel wasn't bad enough, the situation on the island was far worse.
The noise outside the hotel, you would have music inside the hotel and around the complex playing very, very loud all day long.
Just look how many people are actually listening to this. Nobody.
10:05 in the morning. Can you hear the racket outside? This starts about 10 to 10 in the morning and goes on until about 5 the following morning.
This is 3:10 in the morning. This is not unusual by any stretch of the imagination. 50 or 60 yards away from my hotel room, drugs were dealt day and night, and I saw that every day and virtually all day when I was back in the hotel room with my husband. There was also outside the hotel reception a big van which had prostitutes in it. And I walked by with my husband and this big man came up to him and said, "You want a nice girl?" I said, "He's got one, thank you very much." And they were just openly flouting prostitutes, drugs, you name it, it was there, wacky-backy, the lot.
The whole of the beach would be littered in hypodermic needles. We saw many mornings someone raking all the needles into a pile and then digging holes in the sand and burying the needles and covering them over. There were also a lot of wild dogs and dog excrement all over the beach. But you could openly buy any drug that you wanted for a few pence outside the hotel.
Their first thoughts were to leave the island as soon as possible. But to their horror, there was just one flight to Britain that week, which was already fully booked. The hotel residents were beginning to fall seriously ill, including both Brenda's and Marjorie's husbands.
I witnessed people walking around with drips in their arms. The rep that we went to complain and to ask why everybody was so ill just sat there, looked very stern at me and said, "Well, everybody is ill in this hotel." And I said, "You're aware that everybody is ill in this hotel?" And she said, "Well, everybody in this hotel's got dysentery." The food in the restaurant was the main cause of the problem. The open swamp at the back with the raw sewage, all the flies that were going on that were coming into the restaurant and into the kitchens, which were both open plan. So any food, and bear in mind we were all inclusive buffet style food, all the food was left uncovered.
All the salads uncovered. Top bar where they do the cooking. Bottom bar where they do the cooking. Bread all open, covered in flies.
The bread had a sugar coating on the top of it, which was quite attractive to flies. You would put your hand on the bread to cut it, and it would be just swarming. I don't mean 1 or 2 flies, I'm talking hundreds of flies. And it wasn't just on the bread, it was all over the rest of the food.
My main focus was to make sure that my husband stayed alive, because at one point I thought he was going home next to me in a box.
I can remember sitting on the bed holding my husband's hand, just thinking to myself, I'm not going to get off this island alive.
Brenda believes that around 300 people were ill during her 2-week stay at the hotel. She claimed there was a queue of 50 people getting medical attention every day. When Brenda returned home, she decided to take action. She tracked down 115 other holidaymakers who'd visited San Andreas and found out that some of the scenes she witnessed confirmed her worst fears about their holiday.
People were saying, I've got salmonella. Someone else said to me, I've been diagnosed with cholera. Someone else said to me, I've got amoebic dysentery. And the list went on and on and on. And in total, there were 9 diseases that people had come back with from that holiday, from staying at that hotel.
Brenda spearheaded a successful group case against the tour operator First Choice, the first of its kind which was settled out of court. She also set up a campaign group called Holiday Travel Watch, which she still runs today. The British tour operators no longer sell packages to San André, which is little comfort to those who have experienced the horrors firsthand.
It took me a long time to be able to book another holiday with a tour operator. I think it was 4 years after that holiday before I had the courage to actually go into a travel agent's and pick up a brochure and think about going abroad again.
I expected a Caribbean island. That's what I expected. And what I got was hell.
For the go-getting tourist, operators often provide more adventurous activities, but they can come with hidden dangers. The town of Interlaken in the Swiss Alps is a popular destination for a new excursion called canyoning. Included as part of tour packages, it attracts young travellers from around the world looking for a more thrilling holiday.
What canyoning basically is, it's whitewater rafting without the raft. You've basically got a wetsuit on, a life jacket, helmets, and you're basically negotiating rapids.
Yeah, definitely adventure sport. You basically go down a canyon, so you're using your body to, manoeuvre, over the waterfalls down an abseil and jump into potholes and things like that. So it's quite exciting.
On July the 27th, 1999, Kelly Brakovich and John Hulks, along with 45 tourists, took the plunge. But the weather was rapidly changing. A thunderstorm began to form a dam upriver, threatening to burst and trigger a flash flood further down the course.
The conditions of the river when we first jumped in, it was raining a bit. It was still very overcast and that. And everything looked okay, and I thought, okay, we're here now, and I think that was, the nerves were sort of starting to settle a bit.
The tourists were split into 4 groups. Kelly and John were in the primary group, entering the water first. The other 3 groups entered at staggered intervals behind them. But about an hour after Kelly and John started the 400-metre course, the dam burst and a 6-foot wall of water and debris hurtled towards the tourists. Groups 1 and 4 were in wider and safer sections of the gorge, but groups 2 and 3 were mid-course and in serious danger of being swept away and drowned.
Mikey, our guide who was on our side, he's looking upstream and I'm looking straight ahead. He's just yelled, "Get out of the water." And at that, it was just like this, it was like clear this side, and that was just like brown debris. I don't know how to explain it, like a big, huge wave of water. It just hit Nigel, who was in front of us, and just took him straight in front of me, just gone.
Meanwhile, John was about to walk through a waterfall when he heard the water racing towards him. He knew he was in trouble.
There was a guide to meet us on the other side of that. She grabs your hand, and then when the we heard the water coming. It was like a fear on her face that I haven't seen from anybody. And she goes, grabbed my hand, and I held a monkey grip on her hand, and basically the water just tore us apart. So I went one way and she went the other way.
Those who couldn't escape the deadly wall of water would surely perish, but survivors from Kelly and John's group could do nothing to help.
I stopped and turned around to look back at the river, and at that all we saw was, because we all had yellow helmets on, all I saw was like helmets, like obviously people floating past from up the top of the streams. You instantly want to get there and help. You couldn't physically do it because the water's kind of rising, and it was just so torrent. It was like a death wish yourself, putting yourself in there to do it.
I was in total disbelief. I knew people had been killed straight away from what I'd seen.
All we could hear is, I think even people further up the river, I think a guide was pinned at one of the points where the abseil bit was, and he was just screaming, and we just thought, oh my God.
The number of lifeless bodies floating past indicated the death toll was going to be high. Groups 2 and 3 had been virtually wiped out by the flash flood.
It was, it was pretty eerie sight that still lives me, haunts me now.
We were really, really lucky. And we were really lucky that more of us hadn't actually got into the water. But the other groups, at what points they would have been at, and especially where we did the abseil bit, because the canyon it's wall to wall. If you could imagine, you're standing in water and then either side is just rock face sort of thing. I would hate to imagine what would have happened there. They wouldn't, I don't think, had really much of a chance at all.
As the 2-day search for bodies began, the disaster made headlines in Europe and Australia.
The search is still continuing, but the authorities have already begun the grim task of identifying the bodies.
21 people died. All were between 19 and 32 years old. The tour operator called in an expert who deals with the aftermath of holiday disasters.
I was called the next morning to go over to Switzerland and see what support was needed for the survivors and also for the families who might be flying in. But what did become apparent very quickly when I was out there is the emotional trauma that the survivors were experiencing. These two groups, these two coach loads had been together for 28 days of a 30-day tour, so they'd really closely bonded together. And the other thing that we realised fairly rapidly was that we were going to have a large number of actual families turn up who would need support as well. There was one particular event where I actually went with one of the families to view their daughter's body, and I found that very traumatising. And that was surprising for me because as a doctor I've broken bad news many times. I've seen dead bodies, I've been to post-mortems, it's part of our training and part of the work that we do. And yet nothing really prepared me for that situation of standing there and watching a mother grieve over her daughter's body. I mean, it was the worst day of my life.
The survivors and the families of those that died questioned whether the excursion should have gone ahead in a thunderstorm. In the prosecution case that followed, 6 staff from the company responsible for the canyoning trip were found guilty of manslaughter.
After the accident, I couldn't shut my eyes without thinking the feeling of drowning and the feeling of seeing those people, and you run it through your head a million times, and you just kind of still don't comprehend what actually just happened.
People who lost loved ones, and for all the families that, all the mums and dads out there that lost their kids that day, they're the ones that are really going to struggle with it, and you just wouldn't wish it on anybody at all.
Tourists should always be aware of the local political problems before booking, as Jimmy Bellini found to his cost on a holiday in Sri Lanka.
If I'd known what was going to happen now or then, I would never have gone. I would have just gone somewhere. I would have rather gone Bognor or Brighton or somewhere.
Sri Lanka is known as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. It's also been a hotbed of political conflict for 20 years. Despite this, many still travel to the island to sample its delights. For Jimmy Bellini, along with his girlfriend Candice and their 2 children, they were making the trip for his brother's wedding in July 2001. But to Jimmy's surprise, his brother wasn't the only one about to tie the knot.
We were 4 hours into the flight, and all of a sudden over the tannoy system, it just, Candice wants to know if you're married her on the beach in Sri Lanka. And then the whole plane just erupted. It was just, and it was just, oh my God. And then I looked down the aisle and I could see people walking up that I knew, a couple of friends of mine who I didn't even know were on the plane, and champagne started popping and stuff, and it was just like perfect. You know, you couldn't have done it better. She'd done it really well. At this point, she was on her knees trying to propose to me, and I had 50 people around me saying, yeah, well done, well done.
Jim's still a bit tense, isn't he?
Everyone kind of mucked in, they made us garlands, and they got together on these 3-wheel tuk-tuks, they're called, and that's how we took off and went to the wedding. And the sun was just setting, the light was beautiful, and it just seemed, it was magical. We had the Buddhist blessing, and it was all this chanting, and you kind of just drift off into it. I can actually feel the hairs on the back of my head standing up now. It was just beautiful. So it just seemed that nothing could go wrong. It was just, we were just on a natural high. It was just great.
But Jimmy hadn't accounted for the infamous Tamil Tigers, who were about to leave their own mark on his holiday. At this time, the Tamil Tigers were escalating their guerrilla campaign against the Sri Lankan government. Their aim was to secure a separate state for the Tamils in the north of the island. Jimmy didn't expect to see any of this on his holiday. He knew of the conflict, but was told that fighting was confined to the north.
If I'd known what was going to happen now or then, I would never have gone. I would have just gone somewhere. I would have rather gone Bognor or Brighton or somewhere.
After 2 weeks, all seemed well. But as Jimmy and his family were at Colombo Airport waiting for the flight home, they heard a commotion outside.
Walked up to the window, and there's like a glow in the distance. And as we got closer, it just exploded. It was just like this huge fireball. And so you're looking around and just thinking, and everyone's just, doing mundane things behind you, just walking around. I'm standing there with my 3-year-old. I look down at her and she's looking out, and it's just like an orange glow, a huge orange ball of fire. And then all of a sudden, we just saw another little white spark come across, and bam, another plane goes up. You never once thought that it was going to go off. So I'm still standing there, and then all of a sudden it's just like, bam, another third plane goes up. And at this point, I start looking around and just start thinking, hold on, this isn't right.
The Tamils had unexpectedly launched a violent attack on the airport. Jimmy and his young family, including his daughters aged 3 and 9, sought cover in a building next to the terminal.
It was a little coffee shack on the side, which was made out of brick and stuff, and I just said, right, everyone in there. So we all got in there, kicked the door down, went in there, hiding under tables, and at that point there, that was it, the coffee bar just started getting peppered. Because it was pitch black, they'd blown the generators, there was no light. The only light was from, the flares that they were sending up, or from all this fire that was coming and stuff, and from the aeroplanes burning, because there was bits of plane and stuff coming down all the time. So we're in this shack at this point here, and it's all getting peppered, and it's all getting a bit close and stuff. So I'm just thinking, well, we can't stay here. So I looked to the back of the shack, and there's people going through one window.
As the fighting intensified, they decided to take their chances and flee the shack to look for better cover. By now, 47 Britons had also fled the main airport terminal.
We saw this storm drain, 6 foot, about 6-7 foot wide. It was just like, bam, everyone in there, everyone down, everyone down. This drain was probably 100 yards long, but we're talking, it looked like a mass grave. It was just full of bodies. And again, it was just like hails of bullets and stuff coming over, and it was just, you could just hear them hitting things. And the scariest thing, I think, was the whistling as they go past you, because you just think all that needs to do is nip you, and it's going to take a big piece. And I said, right, we've got to make our way down to the other end of the drain. No, sooner as I said that, it kind of all died off. Bam, the whole drain empties. This whole storm drain just empties out, people running for the exit.
In the confusion, Jimmy was separated from his wife and children as he tried to look after his less able relatives. The gunfight restarted before he could get them to safety.
There's just constant gunfire going on, and you know, I even caught myself just shouting, "Just that's enough!" As I got behind the tree, I mean, I've never felt anything like it. This is a big tree, and it just shook. The amount of times it just got hit. So at this point here, I just thought they're definitely shooting at us. And then it quietened down again.
The gunfight at the airport finally came to an end after several hours. During the battle, 13 rebels and 7 military personnel were killed. 15 civilians were wounded. Jimmy was finally reunited with his family after more than 12 hours of separation.
They opened the door and it was just, you know, my wife and my kids are there, and it was like a cartoon. I went to walk forward and everyone just went whoosh, you know, over to them. The relief was just unbelievable. It's like floodgates opened. Everyone was just like in tears and just hugging each other. It's just like, well, these are the last lot, and then we were all together again.
If the tourism industry continues to look further afield for exciting and daring locations, experiences like these might become all too likely.
They sent me out there knowing that they were going to put my health and my life in danger and didn't give a damn. And I find that unforgivable.
That ship should never have been at sea. Certainly not carrying passengers.
We started work on the Monday, but we both ended up coming home bad, and we were off for a fortnight. It really did make us ill.
Seemingly exotic holidays can have a more sinister side, sometimes ending in fear, severe illness, and even death.
There is no question at all that the volcanic activity has begun.
I don't think that any human on this earth can control Mother Nature. When it decides to do something, it's out of our hands.
Second base, so the Oakland A's take.
One of my ribs had gone into my lung, so I was bleeding out my mouth. You know, I just figured it was over.
Most people go to their utmost to get out of the way of them, but I'll go to the ends of the world to get in the path of these things.
Natural disasters strike fear into us all. Although they are an essential part of the Earth's ecosystem, it's scant consolation for those that are caught in their awesome power. As a meteorologist, I try to predict the awesome force of the weather system. It's as complex as it's beautiful, but there's one natural disaster that comes from deep within the Earth that can't be predicted: the earthquake. During the last millennium, 8 million people died from the power of this natural disaster, which strikes with precious little warning. California, a state where residents live on the edge, knowing that an earthquake could strike at any moment, and making their greatest fear a catastrophic reality. On October the 17th, 1989, Tim Peterson, an off-duty fireman, was driving along the usually crowded Cypress Freeway in San Francisco.
I was out running an errand, and on my way back, I noticed there was no traffic at all. I was doing 65 miles an hour. That was very odd. It was an odd day.
The World Series, America's baseball grand finale, was taking place that day between two neighboring teams, the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants.
Anybody who was going to watch the game left work early because the game started at 5:15 or something.
With the last great quake over 80 years ago, the people of California knew the next big one could be just around the corner. At 5:04 that afternoon, San Francisco's public transport system detected a warning tremor underground. 12 seconds later, it shook the outskirts of the city.
I thought I had run over some nails. I thought I had 4 flat tires. So my truck just goes completely out of control.
Second base, so the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an
An earthquake, measuring an alarming 7.1 on the Richter scale, had struck. The epicenter was in the Santa Cruz Mountains, 80 miles from the city of San Francisco.
We usually get very superficial damage, light quakes all the time. But here was one where I was witnessing actual structural damage occurring to a large building across the street.
Unlike other natural disasters, earthquakes come with little or no warning, which makes their impact even more devastating.
I had no idea that. I didn't even know it was an earthquake till the next day. I just thought something dropped on the truck, and it was huge, and I was buried in there.
Unfortunately for Tim Peterson, the quake shockwaves had made the Cypress freeway that he was traveling on very unstable.
It looked as if a kid had come in and just knocked over his playset.
The upper level of the freeway had come apart. Massive chunks of concrete had fallen onto the lower road, crushing dozens of cars, including Tim Peterson's.
It was completely crushed down to 22 inches, 2 feet high. If you can imagine, it was just like a pancake. One of my ribs had gone into my lung, so I was bleeding out my mouth, and then the steering wheel had crushed my thighs, 2 broken ribs, broken back, shoulder. I can remember the whole thing.
Although critically injured, miraculously, Tim was still alive.
In this case, not wearing a seatbelt did save my life. It was a big bench seat, so I was able to fall over onto the passenger side.
But Tim now needed urgent medical assistance.
I could hear sirens off in the distance, but they were stopping, miles away, and nobody was coming to where I was.
Power lines were cut and broken gas mains fed fires that raged across the city.
I'll tell you this now, people are pouring water on themselves. The heat is so intense.
It's been a frightening scene here. As you can see just below me is where this crack in the Bay Bridge occurred, a 50-foot section.
They're not doing a damn thing about getting this thing down here.
We will take every step and make every effort to help the Bay Area in its hour of need.
Prepare for aftershocks. Prepare for 3 days of no services. You got 90 minutes of light left. You better make use of your time.
Mark Hoffman was one of the first firemen to reach the stricken area.
When we got onto the scene and went up the ladder onto the deck, there was an initial reality check for me where I had to think, gee, am I going to kill my whole crew here? I mean, this whole thing's just fallen down. It's going to fall down some more. There's going to be aftershocks. Every earthquake I've ever experienced, there's been subsequent little tremors. I was quite concerned about that, both for my own personal safety and because I was taking, a full crew up there.
As the emergency services struggled to make their way through twisted wrecks of cars and rubble, they faced a terrible dilemma.
A lot of the people we came upon, there'd be no respiration, no pulse, and quickly you'd realize there's no way I can get this person out in a reasonable amount of time. That was part of the triage mission we had, was to rule, unfortunately, okay, let's move on, that we can't save this person.
Meanwhile, Tim Peterson still lay trapped inside his truck.
And I figured I wasn't going to make it. You're a little bit nervous about what it's going to be like. Everybody talks about dying, but nobody really knows what it is like. I knew there was no way to get out.
Just a block away from where we are standing now at 24th and Cypress, rescue crews, an excavating company came and they thought that one of their employees was trapped.
Finally, the emergency services found Tim, amazed he was still alive in the rubble. As a complicated rescue began, it was caught on camera by local TV crews. It was perhaps the hardest extraction the fire service had ever performed.
Tim, who was able to talk to the rescuers the whole time that they were working on him. Two of them told me he had both legs trapped, one on either side of the steering wheel. At one point, he told them, "Just cut my legs off so you can get me out." And they said, "No, we're going to be able to get you out."
They had to go inside and just start smashing the truck up against itself in the freeway and down. And they cut the steering wheel using a small little reciprocating saw.
The Fremont Fire Department brought in the jaws of life. They brought in some heavy equipment, and they were finally able to get him out.
6 hours after the earthquake struck, Tim Peterson was finally cut free from his crushed vehicle. The section of the Cypress Freeway on which Tim was traveling was the worst hit area by the earthquake. Incredibly, Tim was the only survivor. 42 people lost their lives here, crushed by the impact of falling concrete. The earthquake claimed 67 lives and caused $7 billion worth of damage to the city. The San Francisco earthquake of 1989 remains a significant event in U.S. history. Not only was it the greatest earthquake of its kind to be recorded on camera, it was also a stark warning.
Had it been stop-and-go traffic, where everybody's bumper to bumper, there would have been hundreds of people killed. You kind of wondered, the no traffic, the no seatbelt. I was very unlucky to be there, but lucky all those things lined up, yeah.
The most destructive weather on Earth occurs in the tropics. In January 2003, the worst cyclone in a century was heading towards the inhabitants of a small Pacific island called Tikopia.
There is absolutely nothing that can ever be done to stop cyclones.
Cyclones are among the most powerful and destructive meteorological systems on Earth. Every year, the tropics are battered by their force. In the Southwest Pacific, at the little-known island of Tikopia, the residents were completely unprepared for the arrival of Cyclone Zoe. A cyclone is another term for a typhoon or a hurricane. The different names depend on which region of the world they occur in. They essentially act as meteorological air conditioning systems, taking away hot, humid weather from the equator to the cooler polar regions.
Cyclones are the most destructive force of nature on Earth. There is absolutely nothing that can ever be done to stop cyclones.
While most people try to avoid direct contact with such destructive weather systems, cameraman Jeff Mackley lives for them.
My father has always been very interested in weather, and when we were children and there was a big storm or a flood or lightning, he would take us out in the car to look at it. And I've just had this fascination with weather for a long, long time. Most people go to their utmost to get out of the way of them, but I'll go to the ends of the world to get in the path of these things.
Mackley makes a living capturing on camera some of the world's most extreme meteorological conditions. Little did he know that his desire to be in the wrong place at the right time would shape the future of a Pacific island. In December 2002, while checking his satellite equipment for the latest severe weather systems, Mackley noticed a cyclone developing in the southern Pacific region. Undaunted, Mackley headed for the eye of the storm.
Initially, its target was going to be one of the islands in Vanuatu. it was clear from early on that sea conditions were ripe in that area for a major storm.
But as Mackley flew to the islands of Vanuatu with his camera, the cyclone changed course and now headed towards a small group of Pacific islands.
Cyclone Zoe intensified to a major Category 5 storm and pretty much stalled over Tikopia Island.
As the 200-mile-per-hour winds lashed Tikopia, disappointed, Mackley landed on Vanuatu, now hundreds of miles away from the storm.
I remember joking and saying, "Oh, this island, Tikopia, that'll be getting a hammering. Does anyone live on it?" Nobody knew. Nobody had even heard of it.
In fact, people did live on the island, which endured 12 hours of battering from Cyclone Zoe, the largest ever recorded in the region.
I was about to get on the plane back home because it hadn't hit anything. And I thought, I'll do a bit of a search on the internet to see if I can find whether anyone lives on Tikopia. And I did a search and I thought, oh, there's 1,500 people live on this island, and immediately put two and two together and thought, this is going to be really, really serious, because this storm was one of the strongest I'd ever heard of.
A day after Cyclone Zoe had struck, the governments of Australia and New Zealand were slow to respond. They claimed that the weather conditions prevented any aircraft from reaching the island of Tikopia. Mackley, however, had other ideas, and he persuaded a local pilot to fly him out to the island in search of survivors.
We did some crude measurements. We didn't have any instrumentation on the plane at all. We used a marine chart and a ruler, and worked out that it was possible by flying to one of the northernmost islands of Vanuatu, refilling with fuel drums, and then doing an overflight of the island and coming back and filling up.
In the end, they successfully navigated their way to Tikopia. Although unable to land on the island, what Mackley saw from the air shocked him.
I expected severe damage because I know what a cyclone of that magnitude was capable of doing, but I was totally unprepared for what I saw. I mean, it looked like Hiroshima. I mean, it was incredible. All the trees on the hills were completely stripped bare of all vegetation, to the point where it was just it was like a desert. And we flew around and around the island, going increasingly lower in the plane, and we could see people, because pretty much every person on the island ran down to the beach and they were all waving to us and that. But we couldn't land because there was no airfield on the island. It's extremely one of the world's most remote islands, and we had no way of communicating with them at all.
The small Cessna aircraft flying above them was the first sign of help these devastated islanders had seen. Mackley released his pictures to the world's media, showing the severity of the situation and the desperate need for aid for the islanders. However, he soon found himself in the middle of a political situation.
I understand that the reason that no aid was forthcoming in any hurry was because there have been ongoing rows with the government of the Solomon Islands. There's been all kinds of corruption. There's been aid money from previous disasters that's gone astray and things like that. And I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it was one of those things that the governments of nearby countries just wanted to hope would, go away. But unfortunately, when I went out there, and it became big news all over the world.
On his return to Vanuatu, which had been fortunate enough to miss the devastating cyclone, Mackley began to think of ways to actually land on Tikopia and get some much-needed aid to the devastated islanders.
I got some advice from local people in Vanuatu, just what would the islanders eat. Someone suggested that 2-minute noodles would be the ideal thing to take because they're very lightweight. So I went along to a local shop and bought you know, a whole big truckload of these noodles. The last thing I wanted to do was turn up out there on that island and be the first foreigner, the first person of any kind to arrive on the island and just turn up, take a few pictures and leave.
The only other storm to come close to the ferocity of Cyclone Zoe was Hurricane Mitch that hit Honduras in 1998, which 10,000 people fell victim to. Tikopia loomed on the horizon. Mackley was fearful of what he would find on the ground.
The whole way out there I expected to find just dead bodies everywhere, which is, you know, what I normally see after this kind of storm. The first question, of course, on my mind was, you know, how many people have died? And they said, well, none. Every single person is alive and well.
It's a miracle. There is no casualties. With the islanders, there is no casualties. It's a very surprising that people survive.
I can't really comprehend what it must have been like for those people. Cyclone Zoe came to an almost complete standstill over the island. So for about 12 hours, they were in the eye wall of the cyclone, which is where the most powerful winds are. They would have had 200-mile-an-hour winds and 30-foot waves destroying all their villages, and they would have had no idea when the mayhem was going to end.
The rescuers couldn't understand how the people of this exposed island could have survived the cyclone.
These people were living in an extremely remote place, and they just did what they've done for centuries, and that is, when the danger comes, move away from it to anywhere they can. Unlike people in the modern world who are trying to save their possessions and this, that and the other, these people live very simple lives. One other big factor too is that during a powerful storm, all these things in the modern world that we take for granted, like buildings and everything, road signs, you name it, all those things become deadly missiles. Well, on this island, about the only deadly missile there would be coconuts falling out of the trees, so and trees falling on people. So by just sheer factor of their simple lifestyle, there were less deadly items flying around.
Even though he had never set foot on the island before, the islanders knew exactly who he was.
The locals had a little shortwave radio and just enough battery power to listen to the BBC World Service, and they were listening to my reports that I was giving as we were flying around the island. They were actually listening to them on the ground. When I landed there in that helicopter, they knew who I was straight away, and I'd never even heard of that place a few days ago. They figured somehow that I was going to be coming back and that I'd turn up before everyone else, and well, that's what did happen.
After Mackley's intervention, the island of Tikopia received much needed aid from neighbouring countries and began the slow process of recovery.
Cyclone Zoe was amazing in that it had a happy ending. Most of these things don't. Most of them, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of destroyed houses, you're seeing dead bodies, all that kind of thing. Complete misery. With these people, there was none of that because they hadn't actually lost anything. It's not like they'd lost their house, their car, anything like that, because they don't have any of those things. They don't need any of those things. They were all completely happy to be alive, and every one of those people just was smiling from ear to ear.
For skiers and climbers, avalanches are a silent killer, difficult to predict and often triggered by the slightest force. The most dangerous type of avalanches are called slab avalanches. These are caused by a weak layer of snow giving way beneath a more stable layer above. The mountains of New Zealand. Beneath their tranquil beauty lies a place prone to destructive and unpredictable forces. For experienced climbers, Andrew Johnson and Mark Flintoft, the mountains on the southern island represented an ideal getaway from the bustle of city life.
It's got a number of the higher peaks within the Southern Alps of New Zealand, and I guess some of the peaks have a challenge that other areas of New Zealand don't present.
In January 2001, Andrew and Mark weren't quite prepared for the test that the mountain was going to throw at them. Unknown to the mountaineers, a dangerous slab of snow had formed further ahead in their climb after a heavy blizzard.
There is a real threat to individuals who venture out into that terrain, mostly through the winter months when we have strong winds and constant snow build-ups on the slopes.
On any climb, it's important to check the weather and I guess to check conditions. We were aware of the snow conditions, but you know, we'd taken a week off, and we decided that, look, let's go and have a look and see how far we got. So we probably went a bit further than we should have.
As Andrew and Mark continued to make their ascent of the mountain, the weather took an unexpected turn for the worst, and before they knew it, the ground beneath their feet gave way. Whilst climbing in the mountains of New Zealand, Andrew Johnson and Mark Flintoft had accidentally triggered a huge avalanche.
I remember Mark saying, the slope, it's giving way, and I remember looking at my feet and thinking, hell, you know, the slope it's completely just disintegrating around our feet. It didn't matter what tools or whatever you put in, it just completely, with self-destruction at your feet. One moment there's a flurry of snow and ice axe and everything flying everywhere. It was sort of blue sky, white snow, blue sky, white snow. Then all of a sudden you came to a stop.
In the confusion and panic of the avalanche, Mark was struck in the head by his own ice axe. Andrew survived injury, but soon discovered Mark unconscious.
I was buried up to here, in the snow. So we had to get out and get out of the rope that we were in, get out of our gear and sort of quickly make sure that we were safe, and then we could deal with Mark. Just take it easy, try not to move too much now, okay?
Yeah, well, I was quite groggy at the time, but I realised from all the blood around me and stuff that I was in a pretty bad way.
As the weather began to turn, Andrew knew that Mark needed urgent medical attention.
I think shock was starting to set in, and he was starting to shiver, and I was concerned about hypothermia. That was a major worry.
Okay, folks, the information we've received so far is that 3 people have been caught in an avalanche. It's on the south face of the Pope's Nose. Okay. Weather is coming in. All right, okay, so... Right. Yep.
Andrew and Mark had informed the mountain service of their intended climb. So a mountain rescue unit was dispatched to search for the stranded climbers.
We received a phone call from the police. It's a police call-out system where anyone's involved in a rescue. The call goes through the police, and then the police will coordinate with the rescue teams. We collected the appropriate equipment and headed off into the location where the avalanche had occurred. We knew we really had one chance at this and had to go for it then.
I could hear the wind blowing. Yeah, it was getting quite strong. Yeah, I was sort of getting a bit concerned that we wouldn't get off before nightfall.
After being stranded for over 8 hours, Andrew got his first glimpse of the mountain rescue team approaching.
When the helicopter arrived, I thought, good. I mean, I was so pleased. I thought, this is great. You know, you just feel like crying.
Although they had found the climbers, the rescue team were worried about further avalanches.
It's very important that the rescuers check conditions and decide whether it is even actually safe to carry out the rescue.
This is the oxygen mask.
Once conditions were deemed safe to leave the mountain, they quickly prepped Mark for an immediate evacuation.
We knew it was vital that we got in and out fairly fast. Things went very well, and basically we got the people off the mountain as quick as possible, left ourselves on the mountain, and the helicopter returned for us later. That was important to get the people who needed to be off first.
When you consider that avalanches take about 700 lives each year in Europe alone, Andrew and Mark were incredibly lucky to come through their encounter alive.
Certainly, I'll be much more mindful and of avalanche, and certainly exercise the old discretion is a better part of valour.
Natural disasters are often formed by extreme weather patterns, and in the era of global warming, these hazards are becoming more and more frequent. In Australia, these effects, combined with overdevelopment around the bushland, are seeing bushfires rage almost beyond the control of the country's fire service. For residents like Terry Lake, danger is just around the corner.
As the summer came in, one felt that the conditions were starting to add up to something quite serious. And then, of course, in December, all hell broke loose.
Australia's indigenous bushland can become almost as combustible as petrol due to the oily leaves of the native eucalyptus tree falling onto the ground, creating a highly volatile layer.
It's those fuels that burn the most readily. It's like kindling. Add a spark to it, hot, dry winds, and you have a major problem.
On a hot summer's day, on the 4th of December 2002, residents of New South Wales were as usual put on high alert as a fire broke out.
Fire started in Glenorrey and took 24 hours to move 40 kilometres from Glenorrey through to the small community of Barara.
We saw the fire was now building up over in Glenorrey, and the prevailing winds were such that it was going to bring it over toward us.
Anticipating that the fire was heading straight for their small town of Barara, Terry went into action, lowering his fireproof shutters and dousing his house with water in a bid to protect it.
We steeled ourselves for the experience. We knew we were facing a very serious problem.
The intention was that we were going to put all the fire resources we possibly could into Barara, and firefighters alongside with residents who could defend their properties with swimming pools, water, and any equipment that they could use to defend their properties would make a stand against this fire as it moved towards Barara.
Tonight, 4,500 firefighters are battling 80 blazes across the state. Sydney's major threat remains to the north around Barara, with containment operations.
Desperate times call for desperate measures as residents of Barara used anything they could to fight the fire, including the swimming pools.
The speed and the movement of the fire I can only describe it as a wild, raging monster tearing its way up the slope to get to us. It made an awful lot of noise and threw out an awful lot of heat. That was scary.
The biggest killer in a bushfire is not the flames and it's not the smoke. It's actually the radiant heat. The heat that a fire can generate can be up to 500 degrees Celsius, 50 metres away from the fire front. If that heat actually hits your bare skin, it will burn you.
But until you actually got into that situation, you didn't realise just what you were about to face. There's smoke and sparks all around you. It's very difficult to even see the person next to you.
After helping to battle the fire for over an hour, Terry and the residents of Barara were becoming overwhelmed with the intensity of the heat.
We felt we couldn't hold out much longer, and then eventually the cavalry arrived in the form of Georgia Peach.
Georgia Peach was a specially designed helicopter used in New South Wales, vital in fighting raging bushfires.
When it comes down to it, your life's more important. The only thing we're going to have back is our cat. I let him out too soon.
It has the capacity to deliver between 7,000 and 9,000 litres of water. It also has the capacity to suck that water from any small dam, creek or river very quickly. It's a very effective firefighting aircraft.
It was a great feeling, you know, to feel that salty water coming down through all that smoke and hearing the fire being quenched, a very loud hissing sort of. And eventually you could sort of hear the fire moving away from you.
Terry and the town of Barara had this time protected their homes and lived to fight another day. Ironically, bushfires serve an important role in the Australian outback. Most of the flora and fauna is renewed through this natural conflagration.
Many, many years ago, the stories are told that Aboriginal people used to go through and light up the bush and burn it out for that very reason, so they could get that regrowth actually occurring. Once a fire has been through these areas, we can expect that we can get 3 or 4 years of no fire activity in that area again. But unfortunately, the trees keep growing and we keep getting leaf litter on the ground and we keep getting fires. It'll be a natural occurrence in Australia for many years yet.
Called into action again? Possibly, but I hope not for a few years. If that eventuality arises, we'll stand up to it the same way as we stood up to this one.
Active volcanoes are a problem in many parts of the globe, but in the US, eruptions are extremely rare. In Washington state, on the western coast of the United States, lies one of America's most spectacular national forests. At its center is a beautiful and seemingly benign ancient volcano.
St. Helens was a kind of a mountain too that anybody could pretend they were a mountain climber because you could basically walk to the top of it too. You didn't have to have any special mountaineering skills to get to the top.
On May the 18th, 1980, the landscape of Washington's largest national park was about to change forever. The locals knew that Mount St. Helens was a volcano, but as the last eruption was over 100 years ago, no one gave it much thought until it started to rumble.
They never had a volcano explode in the 48 states, and it was all new to the scientists. They didn't know what to expect.
After rumbling for 2 months, scientists drew a 5-mile exclusion zone around the peak of Mount St. Helens. But local residents still found it hard to believe that the mountain that they cherished was something to dread.
Nothing to be scared of. More danger than one of them trees falling on the backside than there is mountain exploding.
It certainly didn't stop Venus Durgan and Roald Wrighton from going on their annual fishing trip many miles from the mountain.
We weren't even thinking about the mountain when we went down there, you know, for the record.
I had no idea that we were even close to Mount St. Helens.
that Sunday morning at 8:32 a.m., an earth tremor put massive pressure on the cone of Mount St. Helens, which took the scientists and the local communities completely by surprise.
There is no question at all that the volcanic activity has begun. You can...
West side, northwest side is sliding down. We got it, boys. It's coming up over the ridge towards me. I'm going to back out of here.
No one expected the tremor to cause a sudden landslide as 8,000 million tons of rock went crashing down the side of Mount St. Helens. In an instant, the landslide released the pressure inside the mountain, and it quite literally blew. The heat from the explosion melted the surrounding glaciers and created fast-moving mud flows. Venus and Roald didn't know it yet, but Mount St. Helens was coming to them.
I think it was probably 8:45 when I woke up, and I looked out, and the sky was pure white. It's hard to explain, like there was a dome over us. And I looked at the creek, the South Fork, and it had come up probably maybe 1.5 feet, and it had small little sticks and stuff, debris floating in it. And so I knew something was going on, so I woke Venus up, and I said, "Come on, get up. There's, something's wrong. Something's going on with the creek."
The mud flows carried thousands of uprooted trees and stock from local logging companies straight into the couple's path.
Everything just came down on top of us. And that's when it was, we didn't know what to do then. Jump on top of the car, thinking that, nothing's going to move the car.
When it came around and hit the car, then I knew we were in serious trouble and that we were in for the fight of our lives, that we were either going to live or die. That was the choice.
It moved the car immediately. Just picked it up and put it right into the torrent. And it was jump, and I landed on a log and Venus went in between them, and she was gone.
Back in 1980, after 80 years of peaceful coexistence, the residents of Washington Natural Forest woke to a violent and unexpected eruption.
As most of you already know, we had a major eruption occurring at 8:32 approximately this morning on Mount St. Helens.
News spread quickly that Mount St. Helens had blown. Local communities sprang into action.
I had a 80-year-old neighbor, and she had a scanner going all the time. And she came over, knocked on the door, and she said, "Ray," she said, "the mountain erupted."
They have indicated that there have been some mud flows that come down the southeast flank of the mountain. Emergency procedures have been put into effect.
The mud flows were traveling at around 100 miles per hour. They swept away homes and bridges miles downstream. And by this time, Venus and Roald were fighting for their lives.
There came a point where I was sucked underneath the logs, and the only thing that was left above, my hand was trapped in between two logs. And it was being crushed, and I could feel it being crushed. And at that point, I would say there was a period of darkness. And I remember hearing Roald screaming in the background to hang on. If you ever heard a grown man scream for his life, it gave me so much adrenaline to hear him, because I'd never heard that kind of terror in anybody's voice before.
The Calais County Sheriff's Department contacted our dispatcher and let them know that they had heard voices on the other side of the South Fork of the Toutle. They couldn't get across there because of the mud flow, and wanted to know if we could investigate and see if we could help out.
The next thing I knew, I felt Roald grab my hand, just as I was underneath all the mud and debris, and I felt him grab my hand, and physically he pulled me up with one yank up on top of the logs. How he got to me, I have no clue, because I could not see him, I could only hear him. And somehow at that moment where either my wrist was going to be torn off or I was going to drown, he got to me right at that point. We rode this huge log, we straddled this log just like a horse, huge. I mean, I couldn't even straddle this log, and we just rode the river It's like the ultimate rafting trip till the flow started to subside.
Not as badly injured as Venus, but suffering from shock, Roald tried to gain his bearings and find help.
We could hear airplanes and helicopters overhead, all over the place, but they couldn't see us because we were in the dense brush and woods.
Nothing matches the map.
We couldn't find anybody, and we looked on the other side, up and down the river, and we couldn't see anything. And so we, let them know we couldn't find anything, so we left.
If we were going to spend the night out there, she would have died.
Yeah, I knew I wasn't going to make it.
Now very concerned about Venus's condition, Roald made desperate attempts to attract the attention of the rescue authorities.
Just screaming and yelling at them, and screaming and yelling and waving a big, I was waving a stick in the air, just aiming to get his attention. They finally saw us.
You could understand why we didn't see them the first time, because they were the same color as the whole mud flow. They'd been intertwined, mixed up in the mud. I just concentrated on hovering while these two gentlemen got out and put Venus in the back seat. She was a tiny little thing, and 16 years old, just scared, and most likely in shock. I'm not a medic or anything, but I know that she was one scared puppy.
And they asked us if we knew what had happened, and we said no, and they said at Mount St. Helens that erupted.
We didn't care.
It didn't make, I was like, what does that have to do with us? You couldn't even see Mount St. Helens from us, and here we were being airlifted out by a helicopter.
It was only now that the extent of Venus's injuries were evident.
They said I had a fractured wrist, and I had lost all the skin from my knuckles all the way to my elbow. I had massive abrasions. I'd lost all the skin off of my face. The mud has silicone in it, which is like glass, so it was embedded in my hair and in my scalp. But I had to go through physical therapy for 3 months. I couldn't walk for the first 2 months.
However, not everyone on the mountain was as lucky as Venus and Roald.
We continued to fly the rest of the day until it got dark, and we found some people that inside the blast zone that didn't make it. I've got a vision of the vehicle. There was two young children in the back of it, and just covered with ash. I can still see that pickup in my mind as we're talking right now.
Mount St. Helens lost 1,300 feet from its summit that day. From the power of the eruption, 540 million tons of volcanic ash were sent billowing into the atmosphere. 2 days later, the ash cloud crossed the US, reaching New York City. 57 people died on May the 18th, 1980, the majority of whom were outside the red zone set by the experts. However, the devastation and death toll could have been much, much worse. If the eruption had occurred on a weekday rather than a Sunday, then there would have been many more people killed because of the hundreds of people that would be working around the forest.
The power of that eruption just makes you appreciate Mother Nature and just how small we are as a part of it.
We just happened to be lucky that day. I think God was looking over both of us that day and decided it wasn't our time to go. That was the only thing that saved us.
Natural disasters are both a blessing and a curse for our planet. The Earth has evolved from a lifeless cauldron through this cycle to the habitable planet of today. But when it still rocks devastation, we can only hope that we're not in its destructive path.